The skirmishing over the fiscal treaty referendum has started already, and tonight we try to encourage that and also to talk a bit about the fiscal treaty itself, along with the household and water charges. With us are Catherine Halloran of the Irish Daily Star, Stephen Donnelly, Independent TD for Wicklow, Leo Varadkar, Fine Gael Minister for Transport, Tourism and Sport, and Paul McLaughlin, Sinn Féin TD for Donegal North East. If you'd like to comment on the programme, you can text us at 53131 and place the word tonight before I comment. Send us a tweet at #beer, email us at tonight@tv3.ie. I've done a blog on tonight's programme on the politico.ie website, and I hope to respond after the programme again on the politico.ie website to some of the issues raised in the texts and tweets. Actually, I haven't done a blog on the politico.ie website. I forgot, but I'll do it after the programme. God, I've nonplussed myself straight away. Warwick, what is Sinn Féin's complaint about what the government is doing already on the fiscal treaty referendum campaign?
Well, I think what's becoming very clear across Europe is that there is now a fight back against this failed austerity approach. We see the Dutch government has fallen. We see Francois Hollande.
I'm sorry. I thought you were complaining about use of public funds to support a particular side in the fiscal treaty. And what's the complaint made today about that?
Well, we've taken legal advice, and we've briefed our barrister to take a look at the government. You know, the government are using taxpayers' money to fund their campaign. They've launched their website, and on the website there was no consultation that I'm aware of with the no side to invite them to put their perspective up on it. You have a speech from Enda Kenny up there that ends with a very resounding call for a yes vote. You have a suggestion that they'll deliver leaflets towards the end of the campaign. We have no sense of will there be balance in those leaflets? Will there be the arguments from the yes and no perspective? And clearly, our read on that is that lies outside the realm of the McKenna judgment, and we'll await now the legal advice before we take our next step.
Leo, it is quite clear from the material that's already available on the Stability Treaty website that one side arguments in favour of a yes vote are being promoted. This is the use of public funds to promote one side, which is illegal.
Well, it's not a campaign for a yes vote. The government's campaign is an information campaign, and one of the things that arises with every referendum is that a lot of people feel they haven't got enough information.
In the section to do with Enda Kenny, there's a speech quoted of Enda Kenny's on the website, and it ends, "There is only one positive choice, vote yes, yes to investment, yes to stability and yes to recovery." That's promotion of one side using public funds to promote one side in the campaign.
What the public funds are predominantly being used for is allowing everyone to get a copy of the treaty in their door. Well, yeah, no, absolutely. Like, I don't know how much it costs to put a link, and there's a link, by the way, to Enda Kenny's speech on that website, but I'd say it didn't cost very much money. What's on the website is the treaty, is an article-by-article explanation of the treaty.
It's not a link, it's actually on the website.
Yeah.
Here's not just a link to an external
public
website.
funds to promote one side of the campaign. Where the campaign has just started, and here it goes straight away.
Like I say, I have no idea what public funds are involved in putting a speech on a website, but probably not very many. Where the money is going, and it's about $2 billion on the government information campaign, almost all the money is going into sending a copy of the treaty to every house, an explanatory memorandum explaining the treaty to everyone, and another mailing later on, and also the website where all that information is up. One thing I think as well is worth pointing out is that the writ hasn't yet actually been moved for the referendum. So my understanding of the McKenna judgment is that it doesn't kick in until the writ is actually moved. And the Attorney General has vetted all of the information that's posted on the website.
Did she see these speeches?
I don't know.
So you don't know whether she's vetted everything then?
She's vetted all the content of the website.
Well, this is part of the content of the website.
I can't tell you whether she's seen the speeches or not, but like I say, I'd say the amount of public money involved in putting a speech on a website.
Here you are. It's straightforward to start with using public money in the pursuit of one side on the referendum.
Not sure that there may be no public money involved at all in putting a speech on a website.
Why? How was that? Somebody who was unpaid did it?
I honestly don't know, but you know.
So you don't know what? So
I can't imagine a huge amount of public money was expended in putting a speech on a website.
I mean, setting up a website like stabilitytreaty.ie doesn't come cheap. It would cost a significant amount of money. Now, I'm not talking about hundreds of thousands or anything like that, but it would still cost a significant amount. But this whole thing about the website, I am not a legal expert, so I'm looking at this with a layman's eye. And when you look at the website, you have your homepage, you have About Us, Frequently Asked Questions, Media, Connect, and you click onto the Media tab, and there you have the speeches not only from Enda Kenny, but from Taoiseach Eamon Gilmore and Minister for European Affairs Lucinda Creighton. There's speeches from all of those. It's not an external link. So to me, it's clearly in breach of the McKenna judgment.
I just looked at it 10 minutes ago, and on the front page of the website, there's Enda Kenny's speech. And in the Enda Kenny speech, there is this speech which says, vote yes, because vote for investment, for jobs, and I think might be something taken from the Lisbon Treaty thing. There's only one positive choice, vote yes, yes to investment, yes to stability, yes to recovery.
Also, another quote from his speech on that, it will have consequences for Ireland, but they are positive ones. That is certainly veering towards a yes in my book anyway. Again, I'm not a legal expert, but you know, I'd love to hear the legal advice that Sinn Féin will be getting on this to find out whether or not it does breach McKenna or not.
And there's a speech, a link to a speech by Eamon Gilmore, which says, he says, but it's a very important part of the solution for our problems, and it says, for a vote of confidence in our future, I urge everyone to support it. It's the speech he gave in the Dáil. You don't.
I'd like to say, first of all, the Brit hasn't been moved, for the campaign actually hasn't begun.
So you're entitled. You think you're entitled to use public funds then on one side of the campaign before the moving of the writ?
Well, and like saying, I don't believe that substantial public funds, if any at all, were spent on that aspect of the website. It doesn't cost any public money for the Taoiseach to make a speech in the Dáil. And the fact that it's just on the website
itself, taxpayers' money was used for that. That was confirmed to us today.
That is absolutely correct. The www.stabilitytreaty.ie website was set up with public money, and all the content that's on it was vetted by the Attorney General, and we're confident that there is no issue about that being promoting.
Speech that I've just quoted from is on it.
And what public money was involved in putting a link to a speech on the website?
It's not a link, it's on the
point. It's the speeches on it.
Is it really a big difficulty for the Taoiseach to make a speech?
Well, here you go.
It is to include it on the Stability Treaty website. If it's supposed to be independent information, and the government have been at pains to say to us certainly that they are doing an information campaign, not an advocacy campaign, so that the taxpayers' money will be used in this information campaign. If public money is being spent on a website, and part of the content of that website is a speech by the Taoiseach or the Taoiseach in which they are saying, vote yes to this, well, then it has to be in breach of McKenna.
I'd say the cost of posting that speech on the website was
probably... It's still part of the website. It's part of the website.
But the cost...
It's not a link to an external site, which maybe in law there might be some argument for that, I don't know. It's actually part of the website. It doesn't bring you, say, a link to the Irish Times website or a link to merionstreet.ie. It's there, front and centre, in the website itself, so it's part and parcel of the whole package.
Can I just add another point, Vincent, very briefly? The Referendum Commission was tasked with providing, independent analysis of the facts in these campaigns, and they have been literally, as far as I can see, sidelined for the so-called information campaign. And if you're serious about balance, you would provide the information from the yes side and the no side to the electorate, and let them make the decision on an informed, balanced basis. And I mean, in fairness, I don't even think Minister Varadkar is even trying to defend it here tonight. I think he's trying to, brush it aside as an irrelevant matter.
Well, he's saying, I suppose the truth is he doesn't know about it, and he didn't know until we confronted him about it. And is that right?
Well, I haven't looked at the speech on the website, if that's what you're asking me to.
Did you look at the website at all?
I looked at the website because I actually printed off for my own use the treaty and also the information on it, which I actually have here. And I don't think anyone can reasonably argue that the information on the website is biased. It's the treaty in brief and gives you a one line on what each article does. It gives you frequently asked questions. It gives you the treaty in Ireland and what it does, and then it gives you the treaty itself. So it's actually very good information. As regards the Referendum Commission, there's 2.2 million in funding being allocated to the Referendum Commission, which will carry out its normal job. Really, in my view, whether a speech is on the website or not is not a big deal. And what we should be talking about,
there was
what we should be talking about
controversy
is the content of the treaty and not the process around it. And I hope that doesn't happen in this referendum, where it all becomes about the process and not the treaty.
Sinn Féin launched its campaign today, and in the course of its launch, I understand that you quoted from 3 economists: Carl Whelan, Conor Lucy, and who's the third one? I've forgotten. And Colin McCarthy. Quoting them in support of your contention to vote no, whereas all 3 of them are voting yes.
Well, actually, where this information was in a leaflet that we've delivered, and what we refer to in the leaflet is fact. It's what these 3 economists, it was their economic analysis, and in the case of Carl Whelan, he said the economics are terrible. Now, I want to be clear, all 3 support a yes vote in the treaty, but what Carl Whelan said was that the economics of this are terrible. What Colin McCarthy said was that these rules in relation to deficit and GDP to debt ratio would not have solved our economic crisis, what led to it. And then thirdly, Seamus Coffey talked about that there'd be no solution within this treaty to the problems that we face. So that was their economic analysis. Where they called for a yes vote is, of course, this bluff, this fear factor that the government are standing over in relation to the ESM, and of course the government have the power, to remove this bluff. This is all they have. They cannot argue the economic merits, because there are none, for this treaty. So therefore they've put in place this bluff around the European Stability Mechanism. Of course, the government hold the veto on this. You need to amend Article 136 of European treaties to make this happen. Our government can stop this from happening. So I challenge the ministers to stop it.
The government has already signed up to this.
No. The government have said that they will publish the legislation in relation to this ESM.
That's right. The Dáil hasn't. The Oireachtas hasn't supported it, but the government has. The government signed. Government agreed to the ESM treaty on this February the 2nd or 3rd or whatever.
But the ratification process obviously involves being ratified, by the Dáil and by the Seanad through the normal process. And the government, following our private members' motion, have agreed now not to put that legislation before the Houses until after the referendum. That was the right thing to do. They have the capacity to go back to Europe once and for all and defend our interests. Are they seriously going to stand over this threat and push it through the Houses and go against the interests of their own people?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, the Sinn Féin leaflet, what it is deliberately misleading, because it does try to suggest that Carl Whelan and Colin McCarthy and Seamus Coffey are advocating a no vote. They're actually advocating a reluctant yes vote. And what Sinn Féin does, it takes out the reasons why they're uncomfortable about various policies and leaves out the reason why they're actually voting yes, and it's a reluctant yes in their case, and I think it's misleading in that regard. We're not going to ratify the ESM treaty until after the referendum, but we're certainly not going to torpedo it or veto it either. There is a possibility that we may need to avail of the ESM at the end of 2013 or 2014, and really for us to try and veto that treaty or block the establishment of that mechanism and that bailout fund would not be in our interest, because if we do need to use that funds, well then why would we want to block off the creation of those funds? Because while there may be alternatives, and those alternatives are difficult, difficult ways of finding funding, at least we know with the ESM that we'll have the certainty of funding.
Stephen?
I think there's an awful lot of spin. I spent quite a lot of time over the last few weeks trying to get my head around the legalities of not just the Fiscal Compact, but all the precursors to it. We have this so-called six-pack that was signed in December. We have the Stability and Growth Pact. We have Maastricht. There's a huge volume of agreements and treaties, and the Fiscal Compact has to be seen within the context of all of them. Unfortunately, there's a huge amount of spin going on. We hear, vote yes for jobs. I mean, this treaty is not going to create jobs. It may destroy less jobs than a no vote, but it's not going to create jobs. It's not going to create stability. Arguably, the argument that people like Seamus Coffey and Carl Whelan and Colin McCarthy are giving, which I would agree with, is the long-term implications of meeting these fiscal rules for Europe will actually increase instability in Europe. In the short term, it might cause less instability again than a no vote. So there's an awful lot of spin going around. The conclusion I reached was also a very reluctant yes vote. The so-called blackmail clause stipulates that if we don't ratify the fiscal compact, we don't get access to the ESM funding. And what this referendum comes down to for me is the following. In 2014, we run out of IMF money. And in 2014, we are going to need to borrow 8.5 billion euros, above the deficit reductions we already have to make in order to run the country.
But we're funded till the end of 2014, aren't we?
No, end of 2013.
End of 2013.
All right, okay, go on.
So in 2014, we run out of borrowed cash, and we've got to come up with 8.5 billion. And what this comes down to, for me, is the following. If we vote yes, we get access to the 8.5 billion through the ESM. There are conditions attached to that money because we've signed yes to a fiscal compact that has poor economic rules attached to it. However, those conditions don't begin to hurt us until about 2018, 2019. If we vote no to the fiscal compact, we may be able to borrow the money from the IMF or from somebody else. If we can borrow it from them,
or from the institution we've already borrowed money from, the European,
the EFSF.
Yes.
I don't think so, though, because what that stipulates is it's not going to lend any new money from mid next year. So we may be able to borrow the 8.5 billion from the IMF or from somebody else, from America in bilateral loans, whatever. We may be able to do it, but if we do it, that will also come with a bunch of bad stipulations. We will essentially be back in an IMF programme, and a bunch of foreign economists will micromanage our country and start doing things like saying, you know what you should spend €1 billion on? You should spend €1 billion on water meters. Stupid stuff. If we vote no and the IMF or somebody else says, actually, we're not giving you the money, or we're not going to give you all of the money, which they may do, we would have to make up to an €8.5 billion correction in 2014. That's on top of the €1.5 billion correction we're making anyway as part of the programme. That would be really, really bad news. So what I reluctantly concluded, because this is diplomacy at gunpoint, I don't like it, we are being blackmailed, but if we vote yes, it buys us time. We get the 8.5 billion, and we have until 2018, 2019 to try and renegotiate the worst parts of the treaty.
You want to come in?
I suppose just
put a point to
just two things. I suppose very, very simply is that if we vote yes, we do have the certainty of the ESM. If we need to avail of it there for us at the end of 2013 and early 2014. If we don't vote yes, then we don't have the certainty of the ESM.
But you have that in your power.
We have,
Minister, you have that in your gift to prevent. Now, be honest with Irish people.
No, we don't.
Yes, you do.
No.
You have a veto over the amendment to Article 136. You have allowed this insertion into a preamble of a treaty. You have allowed this to happen in negotiations, so you failed the Irish people. Yes, you did in negotiations. Now I'm saying to you and your government, will you defend the interests of the Irish people and hold the veto over this issue and say that we will not agree to this ESM treaty unless this, what was the phrase you used there, Stephen, gunboat diplomacy ends? That's no way to do business. And the people, the Spanish government are standing up to this. The Dutch government have collapsed because the Dutch Labour Party are standing up to this. Right across Europe, people are standing up to this way of doing business. So will our government defend our interests? That's the question.
The Spanish are bringing in about €24 billion worth of tax increases and spending cuts. So that's the facts of that situation.
Yeah, but they're not meeting those deficit targets.
It makes no sense for us to veto the establishment of the ESM because we're one of the countries that are most likely to have to avail of it. Other people are putting up alternatives, that there may be alternative sources of finance, but there's no certainty around them. When it comes to the IMF, for example, we've already used up our IMF quota. They might make an exception for us, they might not. When it comes to the ESFS, which is one of the funds we currently draw money from, the last applications for that have to be in by July 2013. Our programme has not ended by then. We could go to the Russians, we could go to the Chinese, but there's no certainty about any of that. At least with the ESM we get certainty. And as Stephen pointed out, the really tight fiscal rules that
so you're not going to defend our interests.
Can I just ask?
We're defending our interests by making sure that we can fund the country in 2014 and pay pensions and pay salaries.
This ESM hasn't been passed yet. This doesn't actually stand. It hasn't taken legal effect.
Do you mind if I just pursue?
Apologies, Vincent.
I haven't heard Minister answer this question so far, and it's this: that the European Stability Mechanism mechanism treaty was agreed last July. And then there was further crisis in Europe, and this fiscal compact thing arose, and at the behest of the Germans. And the fiscal compact treaty was agreed in November, and then negotiations started, and they put into the fiscal compact treaty a provision stating that under the ESM treaty, nobody could avail of funding under the ESM if they didn't approve of the Fiscal Compact Treaty. And this was at a time when the ESM Treaty made no reference at all to the Fiscal Treaty. So there had to be a renegotiation of the ESM Treaty in order to put in this clause. Right? You with me, Leo?
Yes, yeah.
And at the time that the Irish government agreed, if they didn't instigate it, by the way, but at the time the government agreed to this gone-to-head provision, they knew there was a possibility that the fiscal treaty would have to go to a referendum here. It wasn't then clear. And they also knew there was a possibility that the referendum would be defeated. Now, my question is, why at that stage did the Irish government not say, no, we can't have that, we don't agree to that amendment to the ESM treaty?
I wasn't at the negotiations. I'm not party to them. But what I'm told from the people who were there is that we certainly did not instigate it. It was something that was sought principally by the AAA countries, by the countries that are going to be capitalising that fund. And essentially, what it boiled down to was that if the wealthier countries, the countries that are most solvent, the AAA countries, are the ones who are going to have to capitalise the fund. We don't have to capitalise it because we're in a programme, and they're the ones whose credit rating stands behind the fund and allows it to borrow money. And essentially they wanted it because they were saying that if we are going to capitalise and put our credit rating behind this fund, we want countries that are going to avail of it or may avail of it to sign up to these very tough fiscal rules. So essentially what it was that the price of solidarity was discipline, and that's why it's there. I can't believe that that's what happened. And for this reason, that you could see why the countries, the AAA countries as you call them, that are would be lending us the money if we need another bailout, would want to impose stricter disciplines on us with regard to our management of our fiscal affairs than had previously applied. You can see how that was so. And that could easily have been a part of a memorandum of understanding in the event of us requiring a second bailout. In other words, there was no need to assuage the concerns of the AAA rating countries. There was no need to put in this provision in the ESM treaty. There must have been some other reason for including that. And I suspect the reason was that somebody on the Irish side, or somebody who was conversant with the Irish side, said, oh, by the way, you better put in this gunshot thing, because under the weirdo Irish asked the people for, might be asking the people to approve of the fiscal treaty, and if that happens, we better have a threat in there, otherwise they might vote against. No, well, what you're assuming there is that somehow we had some difficulty signing up to fiscal rules, which we didn't. You know, most of the rules, with the exception of the structural deficit rule, we've already signed up to anyway. So what you're assuming there is that somehow we have a difficulty with this concept. We don't. You know, we accept that we need to have fiscal discipline, that we need over time to run balanced budgets and get our debt down, and we also accept that that the price of solidarity is discipline. And we also bear in mind that Ireland is a country that we expect to recover, and we hope to be in a position in 7, 8, 10, 15 years' time, when we're strong enough to contribute to this fund as well. And obviously, when that point comes, we want other countries to be disciplined. Why did you agree to this gone-to-head provision in this treaty? And I have a slight suspicion that it was your idea to put this gun to the head.
Vincent, they agreed.
Because you knew that if there was a referendum here, there was no way, without a gun to the head of the people, that it would be passed.
Yeah, well, it certainly wasn't. If you know, the the impetus for it came from Germany and the AAA countries.
I would love to see I'd love to see the notes on the negotiation of this, because I strongly suspect that what you say isn't true.
But the point of view,
and I accept that you don't know what.
I wasn't there. This is what I'm told is the case, and nobody has whispered in my ear or even suggested anything to the contrary. And usually you do kind of hear these things if there is a different story going around. But the situation is that there are countries that are essentially the contributors to these bailout funds, and they're the ones.
11 billion, by the way, just in case the the viewers would get a false impression. We'll contribute 11 billion.
Not while we're
we will eventually.
Yes, and we will eventually.
This is our fund.
We will eventually, and when it does arise very far down the line, after we're out of the programme, we have to contribute to this fund. Of course, we're going to want other countries to sign up to the kind of fiscal rules that we are implementing ourselves. Of course we would.
Why did you agree to it, knowing there was a possibility there'd be a referendum here on the fiscal treaty, and that there was a possibility that people would vote no? Why did you agree to it?
Because it was never about a referendum. That wasn't.
What?
It was never about a referendum. The treaty was negotiated as a treaty, not looking over.
You knew there was a possibility the treaty would have to go to a referendum here, and you knew there was a possibility that Ireland would vote no. Why did you agree to this gone-to-head provision?
Because it's not a gone-to-head provision, it's a common sense provision.
It is. It is the definition of a gone-to-head. It says, look, come on.
It's the one thing that stands out in the treaty.
If you don't do this thing, if you don't sign up to a set of rules, one of which is going to be really, really bad for your country in the long run, you're not going to get access to any more. It is the definition of putting a gun to somebody's head. What? Vincent, the government's position is on the record. Michael Noonan's responses, I have submitted several parliamentary questions to Michael Noonan. The first time I asked him the question, I said, did you agree or disagree with this during the negotiations? And it's all on the public record, and he basically got back and said, yes, we were at the negotiations. And I said, I didn't ask you whether you were there. I know you were there. Did you agree or did you disagree to this clause being inserted? And he said, well, we didn't disagree. I went back a third time and said, did you argue the case that this was not in the best interest of Ireland? And he basically avoided the question. What he did say was, however, we think this all makes sense. We think these fiscal rules make sense, which includes the structural deficit rule, which absolutely does not make sense. But that's basically what he said. They were there. They went along with it knowledge.
Or they suggested it.
No.
He, in fairness, he is on the record as saying this didn't come from us, and I will believe what he said.
But we did agree to it. There's no denying that it didn't come from us, and we did agree to it.
It's amazing that our government agreed to this. Second thing, of course, Vincent, the second point. There's two achievements of our government in these negotiations. The first, of course, is this, as Stephen refers to, gunboat diplomacy. But the second, of course, was the preferably constitutional. Remember the first, you shall insert this treaty, into your constitution or equivalent legislation, and that changed to preferably. So all of this was to either avoid a referendum, or if one eventually came, was to have this scenario. And I'm saying to you again, I challenge your government again. You have the power to stop this. What government? It's insane that any government would hold. I mean, don't blame Europe on this one. Your government have the capacity to stop this. You have a veto. This has not become law. This is not European law as we speak, and you have the capacity to stop it. So will you act in the interests of the Irish people, and will you assuage the concerns of people like who I respect, and many other economists, people like Stephen Donnelly and others who are have genuine concerns about this? Will you assuage their concerns, and let's have a proper debate then about the economic merits or demerits of this treaty?
Well, first of all, we don't believe it is in Ireland's interest to veto the establishment of the ESM.
No, the text.
And secondly, it doesn't require unanimity.
Of course it does.
It doesn't.
Of course it does. To amend a European treaty, of course it requires unanimity.
No.
To put it into European law, it has to be agreed unanimously. The amendment does have to be agreed unanimously.
No,
and
I can answer that question.
You have the power to do this.
You don't need to amend Article 136 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union to bring the ESM Treaty into force. The ESM Treaty comes into force when the collective contribution contribution to the fund in the ESM amounts to 90% of the countries involved. Ireland's contribution is 1.6%.
That's nonsense.
Well, that's the legal advice that we have.
Well, good luck to your legal advice. But I mean, you have a referendum that you never wanted, so it's not going too well. But in terms of this issue, you do have a veto. You can prevent this threat, this bluff that is preventing a proper debate on this treaty. And I say to you,
they don't have a veto over the particular provision. They have a veto over the treaty itself, which would prevent the ESM coming into force. And you can see Leo's argument is persuasive in that we want the ESM to come into being, and vetoing it would not be in Ireland's interests. In the longer, you can see how that is. But that doesn't deal with the point, why did you, in the renegotiation of the ESM treaty, why did you agree to this provision, the gun-to-head provision? And I can't see any.
The reason why is because politics and negotiation is always a trade-off, and the countries that are going to capitalise this fund and put their taxpayers' money into it, and the countries that are going to put their credit rating behind it, wanted this.
It's always a trade-off. And I agree, it's a trade-off. So, but what did we get for agreeing to that provision?
What we get is access to the ESM.
But that was the whole point of the thing. Why? And that was agreed back in July. What did we get for agreeing to this additional gone-to-head provision? You said negotiations are a trade-off, so what did we get for it?
No, the situation arises where essentially there were growing concerns among citizens and taxpayers and governments in the AAA-rated countries that they wouldn't be able to deliver the ESM treaty, that they wouldn't be able to get this past their parliaments and past their taxpayers because people in those countries were getting sick of paying for bailouts. And that's essentially what was needed to secure ratification of the ESM treaty in those countries. Finland was a particular example in that regard.
I'll tell you what, we'll go straight away to tomorrow morning's newspapers, because the newspapers, particularly the Irish Times, deals with the issue that we're discussing. And let's go straight away. I'll just give those over to the other participants on the programme. Let's go to the front page of the Irish Times. And it agrees with French presidential candidate wants treaty reopened. Ireland has been capable of saying no, says Hollande. The leading candidate for the French presidency, Francois Hollande, has laid out plans to add new elements to the European Union fiscal treaty, but left the door open to a compromise if he wins the election. Mr. Hollande, who leads President Sarkozy in the opinion polls 10 days before the runoff, said that if elected, he would not ratify the treaty unless a deal was agreed on measures to promote jobs and economic growth. He also indicated that the result of Ireland's referendum should not be taken for granted. The treaty, which will be voted upon on the 31st of May, obliges member states to keep budget deficits and public debts within tight limits. And that changes things quite significantly, doesn't it, Leo?
Well, not necessarily. We have to find out exactly what he said first, but what he seemed to be doing in the last number of days, certainly monitoring his comments, is to tiptoe away from a full renegotiation, and what he's probably looking for is a protocol on growth or a protocol on jobs, and that's something that we would actually be supportive of, and it's part of our agenda to have that too. So that's, if that's what he's looking for, is a protocol, then that's something that we can be supportive of and actually will be a good thing. It is important to bear in mind, though, that this treaty was signed by 25 countries, including France. It's already been ratified by some countries and comes into force once 12 countries have ratified it. So the French president, who obviously is now in election mode, may find in a few weeks' time, when he is president, and I assume he will be president, that the treaty is not renegotiable, and the best he will get is a protocol which we can be supportive of.
Can I just say to the Minister again, I mean, it is clear that the tide is turning now in Europe against this whole insane austerity approach, where it looks as if the next president of France is going to seek to have a good look at the very least at this treaty again, where you have the Dutch government that's collapsed, where you have the Spanish government that stood up to Merkel in relation to deficit targets. You would have a lot of friends in Europe right now, it strikes me, if you chose this moment to strike in the interests of the Irish people. And, it's clear that this tide is turning. do you want to be part of that tide? Do you want to say that we also in Ireland believe that we have got a raw deal? And I think privately you would agree with me on this. In terms of banking debt, yes, you would on banking debt.
Banking debt, but that's a different
on banking debt, which prevents growth.
But you're trying to bring all sorts of different issues into this debate. The reason why we have austerity in Ireland is because we've got a massive budget deficit. The gap between what we take in on taxes on one side, what we spend on the other, stripping out anything to do with banks or debt or interests, is in the region of 14 billion euros. That's why we have austerity.
And what does the banking debt add to that?
The banking debt, if in this year, we don't know. Probably, if you include insurance companies as a bank, probably about $1 billion of that.
Do you know the exchequer deficit was 12 billion in 2008? In 2011, do you know what it was? 24.9 billion.
It was, yeah.
The deficit's doubled. I mean, this whole strategy.
In 2011, it wasn't.
The exchequer,
2010,
the exchequer deficit. So, and you've taken about 24.6 billion in cuts throughout the process of this austerity. I mean, that's what you've taken out of the real economy, and it is failing at this point. So, why do you not jump on this wave of revolution, of challenge to this that is taking place, and seize the moment on behalf of the Irish people?
Because, well, first of all, I don't accept that there is a revolution. It's not that long ago the Spanish elected their centre-right government, which is bringing in austerity in Spain. And bear in mind, Spain had a stimulus package not that long ago, and their stimulus package worked until the money ran out, and now they've moved to austerity. That's exactly what happened in Britain.
But they have refused to meet the deficit targets put to them. They've actually taken a stand for their people. But more importantly, in France and Holland, you have a real challenge here developing. And in Germany, you have Social Democrats.
What they introduced in Spain in their budget was a bigger adjustment than we had in our last budget.
Leo, there doesn't seem to be any appreciation in the government. And Michael Nolan again today was talking at one of the Oireachtas committees about the economy, and doesn't seem to be an appreciation of the real crisis that we're in right now. That although there was a nominal GDP growth last year, GDP doesn't matter. It's GNP that matters. And over the year as a whole, there was a contraction of 2.5%. But in the last quarter of last year, as compared with the last quarter of 2010, there was a contraction of 7.2%. We are in major crisis, and the government does not seem to acknowledge this, and the crisis arises from the imposition of austerity. In other words, the programme that you are conducting is doing terrible damage.
The crisis doesn't arise from the imposition of austerity. The crisis arises from a number of factors. First of all, the failure of our banking system and the fact that we don't have functioning banks in the way we should have. The second factor, obviously, is international factors, and the third factor as well is the fact that we have a budget deficit that is enormous that we can't fund. And because we are now dependent on external funders, we have to bring in austerity because we don't have an alternative to that in the absence of somebody who's going to give us a load of finance. But if what you're saying is that the impact of the budget measures depresses growth, of course it does. And yes, we did have GDP growth last year, which does matter.
You don't seem to appreciate the scale of the disaster that you're inflicting on this economy and on this society. That there has been a contraction of 7.1% in the last 3 months of last year as compared with the last 3 months of 2010. This is disaster. We're back into the catastrophe that we had in 2009. There was a relief in 2010, but we're right back into a major crisis.
I think it's unwise to use things like quarterly figures. What we had in last year as a whole was GDP growth, which was quite small,
which is
about
completely
0.7%.
irrelevant. We had GNP contraction of 2.5%,
yes,
and that was because the first 6 months were okay, the last 6 months were awful.
Yeah,
all the indications are that this 3 months will be awful too.
GDP is not irrelevant because we tax multinationals, for example, and when we work out our deficit figures and our debt figures, they're done as a percentage of GDP. GNP is more important, though, I agree with that, because it's a reflection of the domestic economy. And yes, we did have a further contraction in the domestic economy last year, and part of that was down to the measures in the budget.
Had you appreciated the scale of the contraction in the last 3 months? Did you know that it was a 7.2% contraction?
We knew the last quarter was bad because...
Did you notice this bad?
Are you sure? I have to double check the 7 point something figure. I know it's 2.2
it's amazing.
for the whole year.
In other words, you didn't.
Yeah, but
here it
I
is.
did, because I heard you saying it on your programme a few days
Page
ago.
3 of this of the report, National Quarterly.
I heard you saying it on
quarterly report.
on your programme
That's right. I see
the other
it.
day.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
But quarterly figures are often very volatile. And for example, if you want to take a contrast to that,
they're never volatile to the extent of making any significant difference to the disaster. In other words, it could be 9% contraction or it could be 5%. Either way, it's a disaster.
But for example, Vincent, do you know, for example, that in that same quarter, the last quarter of last year, employment increased and the number of people working in Ireland actually increased? That's why you shouldn't read too much into quarterly figures. Even though there's a major contraction in the economy, the number of people at employment actually increased. But wouldn't you think if there was such a massive contraction in the domestic economy in one quarter, you would have seen employment go down?
No,
actually, employment went up.
No. Anyway, let's go to a break and we'll deal with the rest of the papers after the break. Join us then. Let's look again at the front page of the Irish Times. French presidential candidate wants treaty reopened. Ireland has been capable of saying no, says Hollande. That's the presidential candidate who is favoured now to become next president of France. Over on the right, families face jail for failing to report sex abuse. And down at the bottom of the Irish Times, I&M director, that's Independent News and Media director, wants Gavin O'Reilly's package declared unlawful. That's his severance package. In the Irish Sun, tragic Tots 50-foot fall, mum's heartache as little Sebastian dies. That's the very sad story of a baby who plunged to his death falling 5 floors, I think. In the Irish Daily Mail, Fianna Fáil caused the worst disaster since the famine. Noonan's devastating judgment in Conan Cause. He explains why 7 million is needed for more experts. This present government is looking as though it's going to try to best the Fianna Fáil success in causing disaster. Leo. In the Financial Times, UK suffers double dip as recovery fears grow. And from the old man to old Murdoch, News Court chief rules press inquiry. The Irish Daily Star, mum's agony as she is told of Tot's death fall. She thought he was safe in bed until medics called. And also there on the right, the Star has a comment, and I think we can go in on that, and it says there's no point in holding the fiscal compact referendum at the end of next month. The economic complexion in France and the rest of Europe is changing rapidly, and the May 31 poll will probably end up being irrelevant, out of date, out of touch, out of step with the money in Europe, with the smart money in Europe. I thought there was no such thing as smart money anymore. The Irish Independent, we won't break the seal of confession for shatter. Priests vow to defy new law abuse. And that's it. Got to leave it there for more tonight's programme. I've gone to TV3.ie. The weather's next from us tonight. Good night.